Everyone in the pack knew the rule. Don't go near him. If you valued your skin, your blood, your life, you stayed away. They said he attacked without warning. That fear lived in his bones, and his teeth answered before his mind could. I was warned too. But when I reached the clearing, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stretch out my hand. I didn't ask him to trust me. I simply sat down. And for the first time, he didn't bite. Before we begin this story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. They didn't call him a monster. Not out loud. But the word lived in the spaces between their sentences. In the way voices dropped when someone mentioned his name. In the careful distance kept when food was left at the edge of the woods. Eirik. Even his name was spoken like an apology. I'd heard the stories long before I ever saw him. Everyone had. They were passed around like warnings at mealtime, shared in low tones near the fire. He tore through 3 guards when they tried to move him. Broke someone's arm just for standing too close. Won't speak. Won't shift fully. Won't let anyone near. The injuries were real. I'd seen them myself. Bandaged hands, bruised ribs, the haunted look in the eyes of those who'd tried to help and failed. But here's what they never said in those stories. No one ever chased him. No one ever cornered him. They came to him. And when they did, fear met fear, and someone always bled. I first saw him on a grey morning, 3 weeks after I arrived at the pack. I wasn't supposed to be there. The North Woods were off limits. Everyone knew that. But I'd been gathering herbs near the boundary, and I'd wandered further than I meant to. The forest was different there. Quieter. Not the peaceful quiet of early morning, but the held-breath quiet of a world that had learned to be still. Birds didn't sing. Branches didn't creak. Even the wind seemed to move more carefully through the trees. And then I saw him. He was sitting against a massive oak, partially hidden in shadow. At first, I thought he was just another part of the forest, another shape among the roots and undergrowth. But then he moved. Just his head. Turning. Slowly. And his eyes found mine. I should have been afraid. I was afraid. But not of him. What I saw in those eyes wasn't rage. Wasn't cruelty. It was terror. Raw and endless, and so deep it made my chest ache. He looked at me the way a cornered animal looks at a predator. Like he expected pain. Like he'd already decided which part of himself he'd sacrifice to survive the next few seconds. His shoulders were rigid. His breathing shallow. Every muscle coiled tight, ready to explode into violence or flight, whichever came first. I knew that look. I'd worn it myself once. So I did the only thing I could think of. I stopped moving. I didn't speak. Didn't step forward or backward. Didn't raise my hands in peace or defense. I just stayed. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice, his breathing deepened. Just a fraction. Just enough. I don't know how long we stood there. Long enough for my legs to ache. Long enough for the sun to shift through the branches overhead. Long enough for me to understand something the others hadn't. Eirik didn't attack without warning. He attacked when he thought he had no other choice. When I finally did move, I moved away. Back toward the boundary. Back toward safety. I didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't need to. I could feel his eyes on me the entire way, watchful, wary, waiting for the trap he was sure would spring. But I didn't spring it. And when I crossed back into pack territory, when the normal sounds of the forest returned around me, I realized something else. For the first time since I'd arrived, I hadn't felt small. I hadn't felt invisible. Someone had seen me. Even if that someone was the most dangerous being in the pack. That night, I lay in my small room at the edge of the pack house and stared at the ceiling. The others had welcomed me quietly when I'd first arrived. Given me space. Given me work. Asked nothing. It was kindness, I knew. But it was also distance. I was just another broken Omega, seeking shelter. Another silent face at mealtimes. Another name they'd forget when I eventually moved on. I'd learned to be grateful for invisibility. It was safer than being noticed. Safer than being wanted. Safer than mattering enough to be hurt when you were inevitably discarded. But lying there in the dark, I kept seeing those eyes. That fear that mirrored my own. And I wondered, what if invisibility wasn't safety? What if it was just another kind of prison? The next morning, I went back. I didn't plan to. I told myself I was just gathering herbs again. That I needed valerian root from the North Woods. That it had nothing to do with him. But when I reached the clearing, I stopped. And I sat down. Right there on the cold ground, my back against a birch tree, my hands folded in my lap. I didn't look for him. Didn't call out. Didn't explain myself. I just existed. And after a long, breathless moment, I heard it. The softest sound. A shift in the undergrowth. A presence moving closer. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to choose. I closed my eyes and breathed. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Cale stood at his desk, staring at the reports he'd read 100 times. Each one shorter than the last. Each one heavier. Approached the north boundary. Eirik reacted defensively. Minor lacerations to forearm. No pursuit necessary. Attempted verbal contact from safe distance. Eirik retreated. Partial shift observed. Aborted approach. Left provisions at clearing edge. Eirik destroyed them. No consumption observed. The words were clinical. Careful. They didn't say what everyone was thinking. That they were running out of options. That a child, because that's what Eirik still was, no matter how dangerous, was slowly disappearing into his own fear. And Cale didn't know how to reach him. He'd been alpha for 6 years. Long enough to earn respect. Long enough to understand the weight of every decision. Long enough to know that some problems couldn't be solved with authority or strength. Some problems required something gentler. Something he'd lost. Cale closed his eyes and saw her face. Maren. His mate. His heart. The one who'd known how to speak to frightened things. Who'd had endless patience for wounded souls. She would have known what to do. She would have sat with Eirik in that clearing, humming softly, asking nothing. She would have waited days, weeks, months, however long it took, until he believed he was safe. But Maren was gone. And Cale had been trying to lead without her for 3 years now. Some days, he managed. Others, he stood at his desk at dawn, staring at reports that detailed his failures in measured, respectful language. A knock at the door. Come. Theron entered, his oldest friend, the one person who'd known him before the title, before the grief. You're up early, Theron said quietly. Couldn't sleep. Still thinking about the boy? Cale didn't answer. He didn't need to. Theron crossed the room and stood beside him, looking down at the reports. We could try the healers again, Theron offered. Or perhaps someone from the Eastern Pack. They have experience with trauma-bonded wolves. We've tried healers. Cale's voice was flat. We've tried elders. We've tried warriors who understand violence, and we've tried omegas who understand fear. Nothing works. Because he won't let anyone close enough. Because he can't. Cale set the papers down carefully. Every time someone approaches, his body decides they're a threat before his mind can choose differently. It's not defiance. It's survival. Yes. Silence settled between them. Outside, the pack was beginning to wake. Cale could hear distant voices, the sound of shutters opening, life resuming its careful rhythm. A rhythm that Eirik had never learned. There's another problem, Theron said quietly. Cale looked at him. The council is asking questions. They're being respectful about it, but... Theron hesitated. They want to know when we're going to make a decision. A decision. The word sat bitter on Cale's tongue. They didn't say exile. They didn't say containment. They wrapped their fear in gentle language, dressed their abandonment in practicality. What if he hurts someone permanently? What if a child wanders too close? What if we're enabling something dangerous by allowing this to continue? Cale had heard it all. And he couldn't argue. Because they weren't wrong. Eirik was dangerous. Every attempt to help him had ended in violence. And Kale's refusal to take harder action, to imprison him, to exile him, to do what other alphas might have done months ago, was starting to look less like mercy and more like weakness. "Tell the council I'll address them at the next gathering," Kale said quietly. "And what will you tell them?" "I don't know yet." Theron studied him for a long moment. Then, carefully, "He's not your son, Kale." "I know that. And you're not responsible for what happened to him before he came here." "I know. But you're trying to save him the way you couldn't save." "I know." The words came out harder than Kale intended. Theron fell silent. Kale exhaled slowly, forcing his shoulders to drop, his jaw to unclench. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "That wasn't fair." "It was honest." Theron's voice was gentle. "And maybe that's what you need to be. Honest. About what you can and can't do." Kale looked down at the reports again. Honest. The honest truth was this: he'd been trying to fix Eirik for 8 months. 8 months of careful approaches, measured interventions, strategies designed by wolves far wiser than him. And none of it had worked. Because you couldn't fix someone who didn't believe they were allowed to heal. You couldn't reach someone who'd decided the world was only teeth and pain. Marin would have known that. She would have told him to stop trying to solve the boy, and start trying to see him. But Marin wasn't here. And Kale was so tired of failing. "There's one more thing," Theron said. Kale waited. "The new Omega. Elia. She was seen near the north boundary yesterday." Kale's head snapped up. "How close?" "Close enough to be noticed. But she came back unharmed." "Did anyone tell her?" "Everyone knows the rules, Kale." "She knows." Kale felt something cold settle in his chest. Elia. The quiet one who'd arrived 3 weeks ago. Who moved through the pack like a whisper. Who worked without complaint, spoke without demanding, existed without taking up space. He barely knew her. But he knew her type. She'd been hurt. Badly. By someone who should have protected her. And now she was wandering into danger because... Why? Because she didn't value her own safety? Because she didn't think anyone would care if she didn't come back? Or because... "She went back this morning too," Theron added quietly. Kale stared at him. One of the border patrol saw her. She sat in the clearing for over an hour. Just sat there. And Eirik didn't attack. The words hung in the air. Kale felt something shift in his chest. Something that might have been hope, if he'd allowed himself to feel it. "Should we stop her?" Theron asked. Kale thought about that. Thought about rules and safety and responsibility. Thought about the reports on his desk and the council's questions and the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone. And then he thought about a boy who'd forgotten how to be anything but afraid. And a woman who'd learned how to be invisible. "No," Kale said quietly. "We watch. We stay close enough to intervene if needed. But we don't stop her. That's a risk. Everything is a risk." Kale looked at his second. "But maybe the biggest risk is doing nothing different at all." Theron nodded slowly. And as he left, Kale returned to his desk. But this time, he didn't read the reports. He looked out the window, toward the north woods, where something impossible might be beginning. Something he'd stopped believing in. Something gentle. And he thought, please let this be the thing that works. Because he didn't know what he'd do if it wasn't. "I learned to be small when I was 7. That was the year I understood that wanting things made you a target. That speaking up meant consequences. That if you could fold yourself into the spaces between other people's attention, you might survive intact. Mostly intact. Intact enough. My first pack, the one I was born into, wasn't cruel. Not intentionally. They just didn't see me. I was the youngest of 5. The only Omega in a family of alphas and betas. The quiet one who didn't wrestle or hunt or challenge. Who preferred the garden to the training grounds. Who asked questions about plants instead of territory. My father tried, I think. But he didn't know what to do with softness. And my mother was too busy managing everyone else. The loud ones, the demanding ones, the children who took up space and expected to be seen. So I learned to need less. To ask for nothing. To disappear into my own smallness until even I forgot I was there. When I was 12, I was sent to another pack. An alliance. A strengthening of bonds. That's what they called it. What they meant was, we have too many mouths to feed, and you're the most expendable. I didn't argue. I packed my things, said goodbye to people who barely looked up from their meals, and followed a stranger into a new life. The second pack wasn't cruel either. Not at first. They gave me work. A place to sleep. Food when I earned it. The alpha there was, practical. He believed omegas had value, just not the kind that required tenderness. We were useful. We could heal, organize, nurture. We could smooth tensions and soften edges. As long as we knew our place. I thought I did. I thought if I worked hard enough, quietly enough, I'd earn something close to belonging. Instead, I earned attention. The wrong kind. His name was Garrett. The alpha's nephew. A wolf who'd been told his entire life that he was special. Entitled. Destined for leadership. And he decided I was his. Not because he loved me. Not even because he wanted me. But because no one had ever told him he couldn't have something. At first, it was small things. Standing too close. Touching my shoulder when he spoke. Compliments that felt more like assessments. I tried to be polite. To deflect without offending. But politeness, I learned, looks like permission to men who've never been refused. The night he cornered me in the storage room, I was 16. He didn't force himself on me. He didn't need to. He just made it clear, very clear, what would happen if I didn't comply. To me. To my standing in the pack. To my safety. No one will believe you, he said quietly, his hand pressed against the wall beside my head. And even if they did, do you really think they'd choose you over me? He was right. I knew he was right. So I made myself smaller. Smaller than I'd ever been. Small enough to survive. I stayed for 2 more years. 2 years of learning how to avoid him. How to predict his moods. How to exist in the spaces where he wasn't looking. 2 years of slowly disappearing. Until one day, I realized, if I stayed any longer, there wouldn't be anything left of me to save. So I left. No ceremony. No farewell. No permission. I just walked away. And I kept walking until I found a pack that asked no questions. This pack. Kale's pack. They were kind here. I hadn't expected that. Kindness felt dangerous, like something that could be weaponized later. Like a debt I'd eventually have to repay. But Kale's kindness wasn't transactional. When I arrived, shaking and exhausted, he'd given me a room. A job. Space. He didn't ask why I'd come alone. Didn't demand my history. Didn't expect gratitude or submission. He just let me be. And for the first 3 weeks, I didn't know what to do with that. I kept waiting for the catch. For someone to tell me what I owed. What I was expected to provide. When my usefulness would run out. But it never came. The pack moved around me like water around a stone. Present, but not pressing. There, but not demanding. I worked in the kitchens. Helped with the herb gardens. Mended clothes. Small tasks. Quiet tasks. Tasks that let me fold back into invisibility. Where I was safe. Where I'd always been safe. Except I wasn't sleeping. Every night, I lay in that small room and stared at the ceiling, waiting for footsteps that never came. Every morning, I woke exhausted, my body still braced for threats that didn't exist here. And slowly, quietly, I started to realize. Invisibility wasn't safety. It was just another way of not existing. And I was so tired. Tired of being small. Tired of folding myself into nothing. Tired of surviving instead of living. That's what I was thinking the first morning I walked to the North Woods. I told myself I needed herbs. Valerian root for sleep. Chamomile for tea. But that wasn't why I went. I went because I'd heard the whispers. About the boy in the woods. The dangerous one. The one everyone feared. I went because I recognized something in those whispers. The way they spoke about him, like he was a problem to be managed. A danger to be contained. A broken thing that no one knew how to fix. I knew what that felt like. To be too much and not enough at the same time. To be seen as a burden instead of a person. To be so afraid that fear became your only language. When I saw him that first morning, sitting against that oak tree, I didn't see a monster. I saw myself. A younger version, maybe. A more volatile version. But the same core truth. Someone who'd learned that the world was only teeth and pain. Someone who'd forgotten they were allowed to be anything else. And I thought, I know you. I know what it's like to be so afraid that you bite first. I know what it's like to be alone inside your own skin. So I stopped moving. And I stayed. Because maybe, if someone had done that for me when I was 16, I wouldn't have spent 10 years learning how to disappear. Maybe I'd have learned I was allowed to exist instead. That night, lying in my room, I made a decision. Not a grand one. Not a dramatic one. Just a small choice that felt impossibly large. I was going to go back. Not to fix him. Not to heal him. Not to prove anything to anyone. Just to be there. The way I wish someone had been there for me. And maybe that wouldn't matter. Maybe he'd never trust me. Maybe nothing would change. But at least I'd know I tried. At least I'd know that for once in my life, I didn't choose invisibility. I chose presence. Even if it scared me. Even if I didn't know what would happen next. The next morning, I went back to the clearing. And I sat down. And I waited. And when I heard him move closer, not close enough to touch, but close enough to choose, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not hope exactly. Something quieter. Something that whispered, maybe. Maybe this is where healing begins. Maybe this is where we both learn we're allowed to stop being afraid. Maybe. It was Theron who noticed first. Not the alpha. Not the healers. Not any of the wolves who'd been trying for months to reach Eirik. Theron. Kale's second, the one who watched everything, who noticed the small shifts in pack dynamics that others missed. He found Kale in his office 3 days after Elia had started her quiet visits to the North Woods. She's been back every morning, Theron said without preamble. Kale looked up from his work. And he hasn't attacked. Kale set down his pen. How long does she stay? An hour. Sometimes longer. Theron crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. She just sits there. Doesn't speak. Doesn't approach. Just exists. And Eirik watches her. From a distance at first. But yesterday. Theron paused. Yesterday he moved closer. Not close enough to touch. But closer than he's let anyone get in months. Silence. Kale felt something tight in his chest loosen, just slightly. Has anyone spoken to her about it? He asked. No. Should we? Kale thought about that. Thought about interrupting something that might actually be working. About imposing structure on something that seemed to exist outside the rules everyone else had tried. No, he said quietly. Not yet. But keep watching. If there's any sign of danger. I'll pull her out myself. Kale nodded. But after Theron left, he sat at his desk for a long time, staring at nothing. Thinking about a woman who'd learned to be invisible. And a boy who'd forgotten how to be seen. And wondering if maybe, just maybe, they'd found each other for a reason. On the 5th morning, something changed. Elia arrived at the clearing as usual. Sat in her spot beneath the birch tree. But this time, Eirik didn't hide. He was already there, sitting in the open, waiting. She stopped at the edge of the clearing. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was different. This was intentional. He was choosing to be seen. Slowly, carefully, she walked to her usual spot. Sat down. Folded her hands in her lap. And waited. The silence stretched between them. Not empty. Not uncomfortable. Just present. After a long moment, Eirik shifted. A small movement. His head tilting slightly, studying her. Elia kept her breathing steady. Her posture open but not expectant. She'd learned, over these 5 mornings, that he responded to stillness. To the absence of demand. Every time she'd wanted something from him, wanted him to come closer, wanted him to trust her, wanted proof that this was working, he'd sensed it. And pulled away. But when she wanted nothing, when she simply sat and breathed, and let the morning unfold around them, he stayed. That afternoon, Kale found Elia in the herb garden. She was kneeling in the dirt, her hands dark with soil, carefully transplanting sage seedlings. She didn't hear him approach at first. When she finally looked up, she startled, just slightly, then quickly lowered her gaze. Old habits. I'm sorry, Alpha, she said quietly. I didn't mean to. You're not in trouble, Elia. She glanced up, uncertain. Kale crouched down, bringing himself to her level. It was something Marin had taught him years ago. Don't loom, she'd said. Meet people where they are. I wanted to talk to you, he said gently. About the North Woods. Her hands stilled in the dirt. I know you've been visiting the clearing, Kale continued. Every morning for almost a week now. She swallowed. I haven't broken any rules. I stay at the boundary. I don't. I know. His voice was calm. And I'm not asking you to stop. She looked at him then, really looked at him, confusion clear in her eyes. You're not. No. Kale settled more comfortably on the ground, showing he wasn't in a hurry. But I need to understand. Why are you going there? Elia was quiet for a long moment. Her hands returned to the soil, patting it gently around a seedling, giving herself something to do while she thought. He's afraid, she said finally. Everyone sees him as dangerous. But he's just afraid. You can see that from a distance? I recognize it. The words were soft. Honest. Kale heard the weight behind them. And you think you can help him? No. She shook her head. I don't think I can help him. I'm not a healer. I don't know anything about trauma or fear responses or whatever it is the elders have been trying. Then why go at all? She was quiet again. Then carefully, because no one's just stayed. Kale felt something shift in his understanding. Everyone who's tried to reach him has wanted something, Elia continued. They've wanted him to calm down, or trust them, or be fixed. And he can feel that. He knows when someone's there because they want to change him. And you don't. I don't want anything from him. She looked down at her hands. I just know what it's like. To be so afraid that you can't let anyone close. To be seen as a problem instead of a person. She paused. Sometimes, she said quietly, the kindest thing you can do is just be there. Without asking for anything. Without expecting anything. Just there. Kale was silent. He thought about all the strategies they'd tried. All the careful approaches, the professional interventions, the structured plans. All designed to solve Eirik. None designed to simply see him. Elia, Kale said carefully. I need to ask you something. And I need you to answer honestly. She nodded. Would you be willing to keep visiting? Not as an assignment. Not as an order. But as a choice. She looked up, startled. You've gotten closer to him in 5 days than anyone has in 8 months, Kale continued. I don't know why it's working. But it is. And if you're willing, if you feel safe continuing, I'd like to support that. Support it how? Wolves nearby. Close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to stay out of sight. Provisions for both of you, if you need them. Time, as much as you need. Elia stared at him. You're asking me to, what? Befriend him. I'm asking you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Nothing more. And if it doesn't work? Then we'll find another way. Kale's voice was steady. But Elia, I'm not asking you to fix him. I'm not asking you to take on responsibility that isn't yours. I'm just asking, will you keep showing up? She looked down at the sage seedlings. Small things. Fragile things. Things that needed patience and time and the right conditions to grow. Yes, she said quietly. I'll keep showing up. That evening, Kale called Theron to his office. She agreed, he said. Theron nodded slowly. And if something goes wrong? Then it's on me, not her. The council won't see it that way. The council isn't there every morning, watching a boy learn how to be still. Kale looked at his oldest friend. I know this is risky. I know it could fail. But Theron. He paused. What if it doesn't? Theron studied him for a long moment. Then, quietly, Marin would have liked her. Kale felt the words settle in his chest. Warm. Painful. True. Yes, he said. She would have. The next morning, Elia arrived at the clearing as the sun rose. Eirik was already there, waiting. She sat in her usual spot. And for the first time, he didn't just watch. He moved. Slowly. Carefully. Closer. Not close enough to touch. But close enough that she could hear him breathing. Close enough that the distance between them felt less like a barrier and more like a bridge. And Elia thought, this is how it begins. Not with force or fixing. But with patience. With presence. With the simple, radical act of staying. The morning it happened, the air tasted like rain. Heavy. Expectant. The kind of morning where the whole world feels like it's holding its breath. Elia walked to the clearing as she had every day for the past week. But this time, she wasn't alone. She could feel them. The watchers in the woods. The guards Kale had positioned at careful distances. The pack members who'd heard whispers and come to see for themselves. She didn't look for them. Looking would acknowledge their presence. Would make this performance instead of truth. But she felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. Everyone waiting. Everyone watching. Everyone expecting. What? Violence, probably. That's what they'd learned to expect from Eirik. That's what 8 months of failed interventions had taught them. Elia pushed the thought away. This wasn't about them. This was about a boy who'd forgotten how to trust the world. And a promise she'd made to simply stay. Eirik was already there when she arrived. He stood at the far edge of the clearing, partially obscured by shadow. But unlike the previous mornings, he wasn't hiding. He was facing her. Waiting. Elia stopped at the tree line. Her heart hammered in her chest. Something about this morning felt different. Charged. Like the air before lightning strikes. Slowly, she walked to her usual spot beneath the birch tree. Every step measured. Every movement visible. No sudden gestures. No surprises. She sat down. Folded her hands in her lap. And waited. The silence was different today. Heavier. She could feel Eirik's attention on her. Sharp, assessing, waiting for her to do something. To ask something. To want something. But she didn't. She just breathed. In. Out. In. Out. Letting the rhythm of her breath anchor her in the moment. Letting the morning exist around them without trying to shape it. Minutes passed. Or maybe hours. Time felt strange in the clearing, like it moved differently here. Like the normal rules didn't quite apply. Elia's legs began to ache from sitting. Her back protested. But she didn't move. Movement felt like disruption. Like breaking whatever fragile thing was forming between them. And then, Eirik moved. Not away. Toward. One step. Just one. But it was deliberate. Chosen. Elia kept her breathing steady. Kept her gaze soft, unfocused, not directly on him. She'd learned that direct eye contact felt like challenge to him. Like threat. So she looked at the ground. At the trees. At the morning light filtering through leaves. Anywhere but at him. Giving him space to choose without feeling observed. Another step. Closer. Her heart was racing now, but she forced her body to stay calm. This was the moment everyone feared. The moment when proximity became danger. When fear exploded into violence. She could almost feel the watchers in the woods tensing. Ready to intervene. ready to pull her to safety. But she didn't call out, didn't look for them. She just stayed. Eirik took another step, and another, until he was close enough that she could see him clearly without turning her head. Close enough that she could hear his breathing, fast, shallow, uncertain. Close enough that if he wanted to hurt her, he could. Easily. Instantly. The thought crossed her mind and she let it go. Fear would only feed his fear. And she wasn't afraid. Not of him. She was afraid for him. Afraid of what it must cost, to live inside that much terror. To see the world as nothing but teeth and pain. To never know what it felt like to be safe. He stopped. 3 feet away. Close enough to touch, if either of them reached out. But neither did. Elia kept her hands folded in her lap. Kept her breathing steady. Kept her presence soft and open and asking for nothing. And Eirik. Eirik stood there. Just stood there. His body was rigid. Every muscle coiled tight. His breathing still fast and shallow. But he wasn't attacking. He wasn't running. He was choosing to stay. In proximity. In possibility. In the terrifying space where trust might begin. The silence stretched. Elia could hear everything. The wind in the trees. A bird calling in the distance. Her own heartbeat. His breathing. The weight of 100 watching eyes. And beneath it all, something else. Something quieter. The sound of a choice being made. Over and over. Every second he stayed was a choice. Every breath he took in her presence was a choice. Every moment he didn't run or attack or retreat into fear was a choice. And she honored that. By making her own choice. To stay. To breathe. To ask for nothing. She didn't know how long they stood like that. Long enough for her legs to go numb. Long enough for the morning light to shift through the trees. Long enough for something impossible to become real. And then, so slowly she almost missed it, Eirik sank to the ground. Not gracefully. Not peacefully. He collapsed, really. Like a puppet with cut strings. Like someone who'd been holding themselves upright through sheer force of will and had finally run out of strength. He sat across from her. 3 feet of space between them. His head bowed. His shoulders hunched. His hands curled into fists against his thighs. Still afraid. Still uncertain. But there. Present. Choosing proximity over isolation. Choosing her presence over empty safety. Elia felt something crack open in her chest. Not pity. Not triumph. Just recognition. She knew what it cost him. To sit there. To stay. To let someone be close. She knew because it cost her too. Every morning she came here, she fought against every instinct that told her to stay small, stay hidden, stay safe. Every morning she chose visibility over invisibility. Presence over absence. Risk over safety. And now here they were. 2 people who'd learned to survive by disappearing. Choosing to be seen. She didn't speak. Didn't reach out. Didn't celebrate or acknowledge or try to make this into more than it was. She just sat there with him. In the silence. In the stillness. In the space where nothing was demanded and everything was given freely. And slowly, so slowly, she felt his breathing begin to deepen. His shoulders begin to drop. The tension in his body begin to ease, just slightly. Not gone. Not healed. But less. Less afraid. Less alone. Less certain that the world was only teeth and pain. When Elia finally stood to leave, because she always left first, always gave him the power to watch her go, Eirik didn't move. He stayed sitting on the ground. Watching her. And for the first time, there was something different in his eyes. Not trust, exactly. Not yet. But maybe. Maybe the beginning of it. The tiny seed of possibility that said, maybe this person won't hurt me. Maybe this space is safe. Maybe I'm allowed to stop being afraid. Elia walked back through the woods slowly. Behind her, she knew the watchers were pulling back. Returning to their posts. Sharing what they'd seen in hushed, awed voices. She didn't listen. She just walked. 1 foot in front of the other. back toward the pack, back toward the life she was building here. And with every step, she felt something shifting inside her. Something that whispered, "You did it. You stayed. You didn't run, didn't hide, didn't choose safety over presence." And look what happened. Not a miracle. Not a dramatic transformation. Just a boy who sat down. Just a moment of stillness. Just the beginning of something that might, with time and patience and endless, gentle persistence, become healing. That evening, Cale found her in the kitchens. She was washing dishes, her hands moving through warm, soapy water, her mind somewhere else. He didn't speak at first. Just stood in the doorway, watching her. When she finally noticed him, she turned, startled. "Alpha. Elia." His voice was soft. "I heard what happened this morning." She nodded slowly. "Everyone's talking about it," he continued. "They're calling it a miracle." It wasn't a miracle. She turned back to the dishes. It was just a moment. A moment no one else has managed in 8 months. She was quiet. Cale crossed the room and leaned against the counter beside her. "I need you to understand something," he said quietly. "What you're doing, it matters. Not just to Eirik. To all of us." Elia glanced at him. "You're showing us something we'd forgotten," Cale continued. "That sometimes the answer isn't strategy or force or expertise. Sometimes it's just presence." He paused. "Thank you," he said, "for staying." Elia felt tears prick at her eyes. Not sad tears. Not happy tears. Just overwhelmed tears. The tears of someone who'd spent so long being invisible that being seen, truly seen, felt almost unbearable. "I'll keep coming," she whispered. "I know." And in that moment, something shifted between them two. Not romance. Not yet. But recognition. Two people who understood what it meant to carry responsibility. To make impossible choices. To keep showing up, even when you don't know if it will matter. To choose hope over certainty. And to believe, against all evidence, that healing is possible. Even for the most broken things. The next morning, Eirik was waiting for her. Not hiding in the shadows. Not watching from a distance. Sitting in the clearing, in the open, in the exact spot where he'd collapsed the day before. Waiting. When Elia arrived, she stopped at the tree line. Something had changed. She could feel it in the air between them. Yesterday had been a threshold. Today was something else. Slowly, she walked to her spot and sat down. But this time, Eirik didn't wait. He moved immediately, closing the distance between them until he was sitting right beside her. Close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool morning air. Her breath caught. But she didn't pull away. Didn't flinch. She just let him be close. They sat like that for a long time. Side by side. Not touching but near. So near. Elia kept her breathing steady, even though her heart was racing. This was trust. Real, terrifying, impossible trust. From someone who'd forgotten how to give it. She didn't take it lightly. After a while, she felt him shift. Felt his head tilt toward her. And then, so gently she almost didn't feel it, his shoulder touched hers. Just the lightest pressure. Just the smallest point of contact. But it landed in her chest like an earthquake. She didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't do anything except breathe and exist and let this moment be exactly what it was. Contact. Chosen contact. Not forced. Not demanded. Given. His breathing was still fast, still shallow. His body still tense. But he was choosing this. Choosing her. Choosing proximity over isolation. And Elia felt tears slip down her cheeks. Silent tears. Grateful tears. She didn't wipe them away. She just let them fall. Let herself feel the enormity of what was happening. A boy who bit first, asked questions never. Was leaning against her. Trusting her with his presence. With his fragile, tentative belief that maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't hurt him. Time passed. The sun moved through the trees. Birds called. Wind whispered through leaves. And they sat together. At some point, Elia felt his breathing begin to slow. Felt the tension in his shoulder ease. Felt him relax, degree by tiny degree, until his weight was resting against her more fully. Not collapsed. Not desperate. Just resting. Like someone who'd been running for so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to stop. And Elia thought, this is it. This is the moment everyone was waiting for. Not the sitting down. Not the proximity. This choice to rest. To let someone else hold the weight, just for a moment. To believe, even briefly, that you're safe. When Eirik finally pulled away, it was gradual. A slow withdrawal, like waking from sleep. He stood, still uncertain, still wary. But something in his eyes had changed. Something that looked almost like peace. He didn't speak. He'd never spoken, not once in all the months he'd been with the pack. But he looked at her. Really looked at her. And Elia understood. She'd been chosen. Not as a healer. Not as a solution. But as a person. Someone safe. Someone who stayed. Someone who asked for nothing and gave everything that mattered. She stood slowly, her legs stiff from sitting. I'll come back tomorrow, she said softly. Eirik didn't respond. But he didn't need to. She could see it in the way he watched her leave. Not with fear. Not with suspicion. With something that might, with time, become trust. That afternoon, the pack was different. Word had spread, not through gossip, but through the guards who'd witnessed it. Through Theron, who'd watched from the tree line and felt something shift in his understanding of what was possible. People looked at Elia differently now. Not with pity for the quiet Omega. Not with dismissal. With respect. With curiosity. With something that felt uncomfortably close to reverence. She didn't like it. She wasn't special. She just stayed. But she understood that for them, it was special. Because staying was the one thing no one else had thought to try. Kale found her in the garden again. It seemed to be becoming their place. The space where difficult conversations happened among growing things. He touched you, Kale said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes. And you let him? Yes. Kale was silent for a moment. Elia, he said carefully, do you understand what this means? She looked up at him. In our world, Kale continued, when someone like Eirik, someone who's been that damaged, that afraid, when they choose to trust, it's not casual. It's not temporary. He paused. He's bonding to you. The words settled heavy in the space between them. I don't understand, Elia said quietly. Wolves bond to safety, Kale explained. To people who make them feel protected. For most of us, that's parents, pack, chosen mates. But for someone like Eirik, who's never had that. He met her eyes. You're becoming his safety. His anchor. The person his wolf recognizes as home. Elia felt something tighten in her chest. I didn't mean to. I know. Kale's voice was gentle. You weren't trying to create a bond. You were just being present. But that's exactly why it's happening. He crouched down beside her, the way he always did. Meeting her where she was. I need you to decide, he said quietly. If you're willing to accept that. Because once this bond forms fully, breaking it would destroy him. Elia stared at him. You're asking me to, what? Become responsible for him. I'm asking if you're willing to let him become attached. To be the person he comes to when he's afraid. The person he needs to feel safe. Kale paused. It's not ownership. It's not control. It's just permanence. Permanence. The word felt too big. Too much. She'd never had permanence. Never been allowed to believe in it. And now this alpha was asking her to provide it for someone else? What if I fail? She whispered. What if I can't be what he needs? You already are, Kale said simply. You've been exactly what he needs from the first moment you sat down in that clearing. He waited. The question isn't whether you're capable, Elia. The question is whether you're willing. She thought about it all evening. Thought about permanence. About responsibility. About what it meant to be chosen by someone who'd never chosen anyone. About what it meant to choose them back. She'd spent so long trying not to be chosen. Trying not to matter enough to be kept or wanted or needed. Because mattering meant vulnerability. Meant someone could hurt you. Meant you could lose something precious. But maybe that was the point. Maybe choosing to matter. Choosing to let someone need you to be their safety, to risk the pain of loss. Maybe that was what it meant to actually live. Instead of just survive. The next morning, she walked to the clearing with new understanding. This wasn't just about helping anymore. This was about commitment. About saying yes to permanence. About believing she was allowed to be someone's home. Eirik was already there, waiting. And when she sat down, when he immediately moved to her side and rested his shoulder against hers, she made a choice. She lifted her hand. Slowly. Carefully. And she rested it gently on top of his. He went very still. She could feel him trembling beneath her palm. But he didn't pull away. He turned his hand over. And he held hers. His grip was tight. Almost desperate. Like someone holding onto the only solid thing in a world that had always been shifting sand. And Elia held back. Just as tight. Just as certain. And whispered, "I'm staying." Eirik looked at her then. Really looked at her. And for the first time since she'd met him, he spoke. One word. Barely a whisper. But clear. Unmistakable. Safe. The word broke something open in both of them. Elia felt tears streaming down her face. Felt the weight of every fear she'd carried dissolving. Felt something she'd never let herself feel before. Chosen. Not for what she could do. Not for what she could provide. But for who she was. For her presence. Her patience. Her willingness to stay. And Eirik. Eirik held her hand like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. Like she was proof that safety was real. That trust was possible. That the world wasn't only teeth and pain. They sat there for hours. Holding hands. Saying nothing. Needing nothing. Just being. Together. Safe. Chosen. Home. When Kale heard what happened, when Theron came to him with wonder in his voice, saying he spoke Kale, he finally spoke. Kale closed his eyes. And for the first time since Marin died, he let himself believe. That healing was possible. That broken things could be made whole. That sometimes, not always but sometimes, the gentlest answer was the right one. And he thought of Elia, the quiet Omega no one had noticed, who'd walked into the woods and offered nothing but presence. And in doing so, had given a boy back his voice. Had given him back his choice. Had given him back his life. And Kale felt something stir in his chest. Something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Something that whispered. Maybe her too. Maybe she's not just healing Eirik. Maybe she's healing all of us. Maybe she's healing you. It started small. The morning after he'd spoken, after he'd held her hand and said that single perfect word, Elia arrived at the clearing to find Eirik already there. But this time when she stood to leave, he stood too. And he followed her. Not close. Not touching. But following. Through the woods, back toward pack territory, keeping pace with her from a careful distance. When she reached the boundary, she turned. He'd stopped at the tree line. Watching. Waiting. "You can come closer," she said softly. "If you want." He didn't. Not that day. But he stayed there watching, until she disappeared into the pack house. And the next morning, he was waiting again. It became a pattern. Every morning, she walked to the clearing. Every morning, he was there. And every morning when she left, he followed. Each day, the distance between them shrunk. 10 feet became 8. 8 became 5. 5 became close enough that she could hear his footsteps behind her. Close enough that his presence felt like a shadow she'd grown comfortable wearing. The pack noticed, of course. How could they not? Word spread quickly. The dangerous one was leaving the North Woods. Following the Omega. Coming closer to pack territory than he ever had before. Some were afraid. Whispered concerns about safety, about what would happen if he snapped, if fear overtook him again in a place with more people, more noise, more potential threats. But Kale watched. And what he saw wasn't danger. What he saw was a boy learning to expand his world. One careful step at a time. On the 5th morning of following, something changed. Elia was working in the herb garden, her hands deep in soil, when she felt him. She didn't hear him approach. Didn't see him. But she felt him. That particular awareness that said, "You're being watched." She looked up. Eirik stood at the garden's edge. Closer to the pack house than he'd ever been. Closer to other people, other sounds, other potential dangers. But his eyes were only on her. Elia sat back on her heels. "Hi," she said quietly. He didn't respond. But he didn't leave either. She turned back to her work, giving him space to choose. After a long moment, she heard him move. Closer. Until he was at the garden's edge, then inside it. Until he was sitting on the ground a few feet away, watching her work. Elia kept her movements slow and predictable. Pulling weeds. Checking leaves for pests. Watering seedlings. Normal, quiet work. Nothing threatening. Nothing demanding. And Eirik stayed. It became their new pattern. She'd work in the garden. He'd sit nearby. Sometimes he'd watch her. Sometimes he'd watch the world around them, learning, maybe, that not everything was a threat. That people could move through space without violence. That life could be gentle. Other pack members learned to give them distance. They'd walk by the garden and see them there. The Omega working, the dangerous one watching, and they'd take different paths. Not out of fear, exactly. Out of respect. For the fragile thing being built between them. One afternoon, Elia was harvesting lavender when she heard a sound. Soft. Almost inaudible. She froze. Listened. And there it was again. Humming. Eirik was humming. Not a melody, exactly. More like a low, vibrating sound deep in his chest. The sound wolves made when they were content. When they felt safe. Elia's hands stilled in the lavender. Tears pricked at her eyes. She didn't look at him. Didn't acknowledge it. She just kept working, letting him have his contentment, letting him exist in this small moment of peace without observation, without expectation. But inside, her heart was singing. That evening, Kale found her at the garden's edge. She was sitting on the ground, watching the sunset, her hands still smelling of lavender and earth. "He stayed all afternoon," Kale said quietly. "Yes. The pack is adjusting." Elia glanced at him. "Are they afraid?" "Some." Kale settled onto the ground beside her. Something he did more and more lately, she'd noticed. Choosing her level instead of standing above. But mostly they're amazed. He was quiet for a moment. "You're changing him," Kale said. "Not fixing. Not forcing. Just showing him what safety looks like. And he's learning." "He's teaching me too," Elia said softly. Kale looked at her. "Teaching you what?" "That it's okay to matter." She pulled her knees to her chest. "I spent so long trying to be invisible. Trying not to need anything, not to take up space. And he." She paused. "He needs me. And instead of feeling trapped by that, I feel seen." Kale was very quiet. When she looked at him, something in his expression made her breath catch. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said softly. "Just, I'm grateful you came here. I'm grateful you stayed." There was weight in those words. Weight that felt like more than just gratitude for Eirik's healing. But Elia didn't know what to do with it. So she looked away, back at the sunset, and let the moment pass. For now. The breakthrough came 2 weeks later. Elia was in the garden, as always. Eirik was sitting nearby, as always. But this time, he was closer. Close enough that if she reached out, she could touch him. She didn't. She never reached first. She always let him choose. But then, she felt his hand on her shoulder. Gentle. Tentative. Testing. She went very still. "It's okay," she said quietly. "You're safe." His hand stayed there for a long moment. And then he moved. Closer. Until he was sitting beside her, shoulder to shoulder, the way they sat in the clearing. But this time, they weren't alone in the woods. They were surrounded by pack territory. By sounds and smells and the presence of others. And he was choosing to stay anyway. Choosing her presence over his fear of the world. Elia felt tears slip down her cheeks. "You're so brave," she whispered. "Do you know that? You're so brave." Eirik leaned his head against her shoulder. And for the first time since she'd met him, he relaxed completely. No tension. No coiled readiness to fight or flee. Just rest. Pure, simple rest. They sat like that until the sun set. Until the evening meal bell rang and pack members began moving toward the dining hall. Until the world grew dark and quiet around them. And when Elia finally stood to go inside, Eirik stood too. And he followed her. Not to the boundary. Not to the tree line. All the way to the pack house. All the way to her door. She turned to him in the dim hallway. "Do you want to come in?" she asked softly. He looked at the door. At the small room beyond. At the threshold he'd never crossed. And then he looked at her. And slowly, so slowly, he nodded. Elia opened the door. Her room was simple. Small. A bed. A chair. A window that looked out over the garden. Nothing threatening. Nothing overwhelming. Just space. Eirik stepped inside carefully. Looking at everything. Processing. Learning. After a moment, he moved to the corner farthest from the door. And he sat down. Back against the wall. Eyes on the exit. Old habits. But he was inside. Choosing to be in an enclosed space. Trusting that she wouldn't trap him. Trusting that here, like in the clearing, like in the garden, he was safe. Elia sat on the edge of her bed. "You can stay as long as you want," she said quietly. "Or you can leave whenever you need to. The door stays unlocked. Always." He nodded slightly. Understanding. And then he closed his eyes. And he slept. For the first time in longer than anyone could remember, Eirik slept in a place that wasn't the woods. In a place with walls and a roof and another person nearby. And he slept peacefully. Because he'd finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Not just a person. But a home. When Kale heard, because Theron told him, because the guard who'd watched Eirik enter Elia's room had reported it. He stood at his window and looked out at the night. And he thought about the bond forming between them. About a boy who was learning to live instead of just survive. About a woman who was learning that mattering wasn't the same as being vulnerable. About healing that happened quietly, without fanfare, in the small spaces between heartbeats. And he thought about Maren. About what she would say if she could see this. She'd be proud, he knew. Of Eirik. Of Elia. Of the pack for giving them space to find each other. And maybe, though it felt dangerous to even think it, maybe she'd be proud of him too. For finally letting go of control. For trusting that healing didn't require his intervention. For believing that sometimes the best thing a leader could do was simply allow. He touched the window glass. Cold beneath his palm. "I'm learning too, Maren," he whispered to the night. "I'm learning that maybe I'm allowed to heal as well." And somewhere in the pack house, in a small room with an unlocked door, two broken people slept. Safe. Chosen. Together. And for the first time in a very long time, the future felt less like a burden. And more like a promise. Kale couldn't remember when it changed. When gratitude became something else. When watching Elia became less about Eirik's progress and more about her. Maybe it was the morning he saw her in the garden, dirt under her fingernails, laughing softly at something Eirik had done, some small, awkward attempt at helping her plant seeds. Maybe it was the evening he found her in the library, reading aloud to Eirik, her voice gentle and unhurried, not caring that the boy couldn't respond yet, just filling the silence with words. Maybe it was the day she'd stood in front of the council, quiet but unflinching, and said, "He's not dangerous. He's scared. And if you can't see the difference, then maybe the problem isn't him." Or maybe it had been happening all along. And he'd just been too careful, too guarded, too determined not to feel anything beyond duty and grief to notice. It was Theron who said something first. They were walking the pack boundary, doing their weekly patrol, when Theron glanced at him and said, "You're staring again." Kale blinked. "What?" "At the Omega. Elia." Theron's voice was carefully neutral. "You watch her a lot lately." "I'm watching Eirik's progress." "Right." Theron was quiet for a moment. "Is that what we're calling it?" Kale stopped walking. Theron stopped too, turning to face him. "Kale," he said gently, "it's been 3 years. I know how long it's been." "Do you?" Theron's voice was soft. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been holding your breath since Marin died. Like you've been waiting for permission to keep living." Kale looked away. "I'm not saying you have to feel anything," Theron continued. "I'm not saying you're required to move on or let go or whatever people say when they don't understand grief. I'm just saying." He paused. "Maybe you're allowed to notice someone. Maybe you're allowed to feel something other than loss." Kale didn't respond. Couldn't respond. Because Theron was right. And that terrified him. That evening, Kale found himself at the garden again. He'd been coming here more often lately, telling himself it was to check on Eirik's integration, to make sure the pack was adjusting, to monitor the situation. But the truth was simpler. He came to see her. Elia was there, as she often was in the evenings. Watering the herbs. Checking the vegetables. Moving through the space with quiet competence. Eirik sat nearby, watching her with the kind of attention that spoke of complete trust. Kale leaned against the fence, just observing. And he noticed things. The way she moved, economical, graceful, no wasted motion. The way she hummed while she worked, soft, tuneless, just vibration and breath. The way she'd pause to touch growing things, her fingers gentle on leaves, like she was checking in, making sure they knew they were tended. The way she never demanded Eirik's attention but always welcomed it when he offered. The way her face, usually so carefully neutral, softened when she thought no one was watching. The way she existed, fully present, asking for nothing, giving everything that mattered. And Kale thought, when did she become beautiful? Not in the conventional way. Not in the way that demanded notice. But in the way sunlight through leaves was beautiful. In the way first snow was beautiful. Quiet. Steady. True. She noticed him eventually. Looked up from the tomato plants and met his eyes. "Alpha," she said softly. "Kale," he corrected without thinking. "You can call me Kale." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe. Or uncertainty. "Kale," she repeated, testing the name. It sounded different in her voice. More intimate somehow. He pushed away from the fence and walked into the garden. Eirik tensed slightly but didn't move. "Progress. How is he?" Kale asked, nodding toward the boy. "Better." Elia turned back to her work. "He's sleeping through the night now. Eating more. He even tried to speak yesterday." "What did he say?" "Just my name." She smiled slightly. "Or tried to. It came out more like Lia. But still. That's incredible." "It's slow," she said quietly. "Slower than people want, I think. I hear the whispers. About how long this is taking. About whether it's worth the resources." Kale frowned. "Who's saying that?" "It doesn't matter." She moved to the next plant. "They're not wrong. I am taking time and attention and space. And Eirik is too. And neither of us is particularly useful to the pack." "Elia." "It's fine." Her voice was calm. Too calm. "I understand how these things work. Eventually, you'll need the space I'm taking up. Need the resources we're using. And that's okay. I've always known this was temporary." Kale stared at her. "Is that what you think?" he asked quietly. "That you're temporary?" She didn't answer. Didn't look at him. Just kept working, her hands steady even though he could see the tension in her shoulders. "Elia," he said again, and this time he stepped closer. "Look at me." She did, reluctantly. And he saw it in her eyes. That old fear. The one that said, I'm not allowed to stay. I'm not allowed to matter. Eventually, everyone leaves or sends me away. You're not temporary, he said firmly. You're Pack. You've been Pack since the moment you arrived. And nothing you've done, nothing you could do, would change that. But if the council answers to me. His voice was harder than he intended. And I'm telling you, you have a place here. For as long as you want it. Do you understand? She stared at him. And slowly, something in her expression shifted. Not quite belief. But maybe the beginning of it. Why? She whispered. The question landed in his chest. Why? Because she'd saved Eirik. Because she'd shown the Pack what gentleness could accomplish. Because she'd changed the way he thought about healing, about leadership, about what it meant to truly help someone. Because when he looked at her, he didn't just see an Omega or a Pack member or a solution to a problem. He saw her. Strong and scared and brave and broken and whole all at once. He saw someone who'd survived things that should have destroyed her and had somehow, impossibly, remained soft. He saw someone who made him want to be better. Not as an alpha. As a person. But he couldn't say that. Not yet. Not when he'd only just begun to understand it himself. So instead, he said. Because you chose to stay when you could have kept running. Because you chose to help when you could have stayed invisible. Because you're exactly the kind of person this Pack needs. He paused. And because He stopped. Elia waited, her eyes wide. Because I'm grateful, he finished quietly. For everything you've done. For Eirik. For all of us. It wasn't what he wanted to say. But it was all he could manage. For now. That night, Kale lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. Thinking about Maren. He'd loved her completely. Wholly. With every part of himself. And when she died, he'd thought that was it. That he'd used up his capacity for that kind of feeling. That grief had hollowed him out too thoroughly for anything else to grow. But lately, he'd started to wonder. If maybe love wasn't a finite resource. If maybe the heart could hold both grief and hope. Both memory and possibility. Both what was lost and what might be found. Maren would want him to be happy. He knew that. She'd said it, even in those final weeks. Promise me you won't stop living, she'd whispered. Promise me you'll let yourself feel things. Even if it hurts. Especially if it hurts. Because that's how you know you're alive. He'd promised. But he hadn't really understood what she meant. Until now. Until Elia. The next morning, Kale made a decision. He found Elia in the kitchen, helping prepare breakfast. Can I talk to you? He asked quietly. She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron and following him outside. They walked to the edge of the Pack grounds, where the forest began. Private. Quiet. I wanted to apologize, Kale said. Elia looked at him, confused. For what? For not seeing you sooner. He turned to face her. You've been here for over a month. And I've watched you work, watched you help Eirik, watched you become part of this Pack. But I never really saw you until recently. You've been grieving, she said softly. That's not something to apologize for. Maybe not. But I should have noticed. He paused. You do so much. You ask for nothing. You make yourself small so others have room to grow. And I want you to know. He met her eyes. You don't have to do that here. You don't have to earn your place by being useful or quiet or invisible. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to want things. You're allowed to matter. Elia's breath caught. I don't know how, she whispered. Then learn. His voice was gentle. Let us teach you. Let Eirik teach you. He's learning because of you. Let the Pack teach you. Let me. He stopped. Too much. Too fast. But Elia was looking at him with something in her eyes he couldn't quite read. Let you what? She asked softly. Kale hesitated. Then carefully. Let me know you. Not as Eirik's anchor. Not as a Pack member. Just you. The words hung in the air between them. Elia was very quiet. "I don't think I know how to do that either," she said finally. "Then we'll figure it out together." She studied him for a long moment. And then, so quietly he almost missed it. "Okay." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a promise. It was just a single word. But it felt like a beginning. And as they walked back toward the packhouse together, Cale felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Not grief. Not duty. Not loss. But hope. Quiet. Fragile. Impossibly precious. Hope. And he thought, maybe this is what Marin meant. Maybe this is what it means to keep living. To let yourself feel things even when you're scared. To choose possibility even when it might hurt. To believe, against all evidence, that the heart has room for more than one love. That honoring the past doesn't mean refusing the future. He glanced at Elia walking beside him. She was looking at the ground, her expression thoughtful. And he thought, I could love her. Maybe I already do. Maybe that's okay. It happened on a morning that felt like any other. Elia woke to pale sunlight filtering through her window. Eirik was asleep in his corner. His corner now, she'd started thinking of it. The place he'd claimed as his safe spot in her safe room. She lay there for a moment, listening to him breathe. Deep. Even. Peaceful. So different from those first weeks, when every breath had been shallow and quick, when even sleep had looked like a fight. She rose quietly, careful not to wake him, and dressed for the day. But when she turned to leave, Lia. She froze. Eirik was awake, sitting up, watching her. "Good morning," she said softly. He stood. Crossed the room. And for the first time since she'd known him, he reached for her first. His hand found hers. Held it. Not desperately like before. Just. Naturally. Like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Stay?" he asked. His voice was still rough from disuse, still uncertain. But clearer than she'd ever heard it. "I always come back," she reminded him gently. "No." He squeezed her hand. "Stay. Here. With me. Today." Elia's breath caught. It was the longest sentence he'd ever spoken. And more than that. He was asking for something. Expressing a want. A preference. A choice. Not just reacting. Not just accepting. Choosing. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." They spent the morning in the garden. But this time, Eirik didn't just watch. He helped. Awkwardly at first, his hands unused to the careful work of tending growing things. But he tried. Copied her movements. Asked questions with his eyes when he wasn't sure what to do. And slowly, carefully, he learned. How to pull weeds without disturbing roots. How to test soil for moisture. How to deadhead flowers to encourage new growth. Simple things. Peaceful things. Things that had nothing to do with survival or fear or defense. Just life. The quiet work of nurturing. At one point, Elia looked up to find him smiling. Actually smiling. Small and tentative, like he'd forgotten how his face made that shape. But real. "What?" she asked gently. He touched a tomato plant, his fingers careful on the leaves. "Growing," he said quietly. "Yes. They're growing well this year." "No." He looked at her. "Me. Growing." And Elia felt tears slip down her cheeks. Because he understood. He understood that healing wasn't a single moment. It was this. Small, daily acts of choosing life over fear. Choosing growth over survival. Choosing to tend things instead of destroy them. "Yes," she whispered. "You're growing." That afternoon, Cale found them in the garden. He'd been looking for Elia, something about updated work schedules, but he stopped when he saw them. Eirik was showing Elia something he'd found. A beetle, it looked like. Holding it carefully in his palm, his face full of wonder. And Elia was leaning close, examining it with equal seriousness, as if the beetle were the most important discovery in the world. They looked like a family. The thought hit Cale hard and sudden. Not a healer and a patient. Not an Omega and her charge. A mother and son. In everything but name. Kale. He startled. Elia had noticed him. Sorry, he said. I didn't mean to interrupt. You're not. She stood, brushing dirt from her knees. Eirik, this is Kale. You remember him? Eirik looked up, met Kale's eyes, and didn't flinch. Progress. Hello, Eirik, Kale said gently. For a long moment, Eirik just stared at him. Then, carefully, he held out his hand. The one with the beetle. Showing Kale. Sharing. Kale crouched down, bringing himself to Eirik's level. That's a beautiful beetle, he said. Ground beetle, I think. They're good for gardens. They eat the bugs that hurt the plants. Eirik listened intently. Then, after a moment, protector. Yes. Kale smiled. A protector. Eirik looked at the beetle. Then at Kale. Like you, he said quietly. The words landed in Kale's chest. This boy, this terrified, traumatized boy who'd spent months seeing everyone as a threat, was calling him a protector. Was recognizing safety in him. I try to be, Kale said honestly. For everyone in the pack. Including you. Eirik nodded slowly. Then he carefully set the beetle down in the garden, watching it scurry away into the leaves. And he turned to Elia. Hungry, he said simply. She laughed softly. Then let's get you something to eat. As they walked toward the pack house, Eirik walked between them. Not behind Elia, seeking her protection. Not ahead, trying to escape. Between them. Part of them. And Kale felt something settle in his chest. Something that felt like rightness. That evening, the three of them sat in Elia's room. It had become their space somehow. Elia at her small desk, mending clothes. Eirik on the floor, drawing on paper Kale had brought him. Kale in the chair, reading reports but mostly just present. It was peaceful. Domestic. Normal in a way Kale hadn't experienced since Marin died. And he realized, he'd stopped coming here to check on Eirik's progress. He came because he wanted to be here. Because this room, with these people, felt like home. Lia. Elia looked up. Yes. Eirik held up his drawing. It was crude, the work of someone still remembering how hands made art. But clear. 3 figures. One small. One medium. One tall. Standing together. Us, Eirik said. Elia's hands stilled on the shirt she was mending. Yes, she whispered. That's us. Eirik looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then he looked at Kale. Pack? He asked. The question was simple. But it meant everything. Are we pack? Are we family? Are we permanent? Am I allowed to stay? Am I allowed to belong? Kale set down his papers. Yes, he said firmly. Pack. Family. All of us. Eirik studied him. Then, quietly, safe. That word again. The first word he'd spoken to Elia. But this time, it wasn't a question. It was a statement. A truth he'd finally learned to believe. Safe. Later that night, after Eirik had fallen asleep in his corner, Kale and Elia stood by the window, looking out at the pack grounds. At the life continuing peacefully around them. He's really healing, Elia said softly. Because of you. Because someone finally gave him time. She paused. And space to be afraid without punishment. And presence without expectation. Kale looked at her. You're talking about yourself too, aren't you? She glanced at him, surprised. You needed the same things, he continued. Time. Space to be afraid. Presence without expectation. And this pack, we gave you that. The way you gave it to Eirik. Elia was quiet for a long moment. I didn't think I was allowed to heal, she whispered. I thought I was just supposed to survive. To be useful. To stay small and quiet and not take up too much space. And now. Now. She looked at Eirik, sleeping peacefully. Now I think maybe healing is what happens when someone lets you exist without asking you to be anything other than what you are. She turned to Kale. You did that for me, she said quietly. You and this pack. You let me just be. And Eirik did that for me too, in a way. He needed me to be present, but he never asked me to be more than I was. Kale felt his heart ache. Elia, he said gently. You're not nothing. You never were. You're. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You're extraordinary. Not because of what you've done, but because of who you are. The way you see people. The way you stay when it would be easier to leave. The way you choose gentleness even when the world hasn't been gentle with you. She was staring at him now. I see you, he continued. Not as a convenient solution. Not as someone who happened to help when we needed it. I see you. And I. He stopped. This wasn't the time. Eirik was here, sleeping. This space was theirs, all three of them. He couldn't make it about just the two of them. Not yet. But Elia was looking at him with something in her eyes. Something that might have been hope. Or fear. Or both. You what? She whispered. Kale reached out. Slowly. Carefully. And he took her hand. I'm grateful, he said. For you. For everything you've brought to this pack. To Eirik. He paused. To me. Her hand trembled in his. Kale. You don't have to say anything, he said quietly. I just wanted you to know. You matter. You've always mattered. And whatever you need, time, space, patience, I'll give it to you. He squeezed her hand gently. Because you're worth waiting for. That night, after Kale left, Elia lay in her bed. Unable to sleep. Thinking about Eirik's drawing. 3 figures. Standing together. Pack. Family. Safe. Thinking about Kale's words. You're worth waiting for. She'd never been worth waiting for. She'd been disposable. Forgettable. Temporary. But here, in this pack, with this boy who'd chosen her and this alpha who saw her. Maybe she was learning something new. Maybe she was learning that worth wasn't something you earned. It was something you were allowed to accept. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to accept it. Not just from Eirik. But from Kale. From the pack. From herself. She looked at Eirik, sleeping peacefully in his corner. And she thought, thank you. Thank you for being afraid enough to need me. Thank you for healing enough to show me how. Thank you for choosing me. Because in choosing you back, I found myself. And she closed her eyes. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she slept without fear. Safe. Chosen. Home. 3 months later, the council called a gathering. Elia had known it was coming. She'd heard the whispers. Felt the weight of questions unasked but present. Questions about Eirik's place in the pack. About her place. About what happened next. She wasn't afraid exactly. But she wasn't certain either. Permanence still felt like something she was learning to trust. The council chamber was full when she arrived. Elders. Pack leaders. Witnesses. And at the center, standing tall and calm. Kale. His eyes found hers across the room. And something in his expression steadied her. I'm here, it said. You're not alone. Eirik stood beside her, his hand wrapped tightly around hers. He was nervous. She could feel it in the tension of his grip. But he was here. Choosing to be present, even in a room full of people, even with attention focused on him. That alone was a miracle. Elder Margot spoke first, her voice gentle but firm. We've called this gathering to address the matter of Eirik's integration into the pack. And to acknowledge the role Elia has played in his healing. She looked at Elia directly. 3 months ago, this boy could not be approached without violence. Could not speak. Could not trust. And now. She gestured to Eirik, standing calmly beside Elia. Now he stands before us. Healing. Growing. Becoming part of our community. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. The question before us, Margot continued, is what happens next. Eirik has bonded to Elia. That bond is clear, strong, and by all accounts healthy. But such bonds carry responsibility. Carry permanence. She paused. Elia, do you understand what is being asked of you? Elia's throat was tight. She looked down at Eirik, whose eyes were fixed on her face. Trusting. Waiting. Believing she wouldn't leave. "Yes," she said quietly. "I understand." "And are you willing?" Margot's voice was kind. "To accept responsibility for his care, his growth, his well-being? Not as an assignment, but as a choice? For as long as he needs you." Elia felt tears prick her eyes. For as long as he needs you. She thought about all the times she'd been temporary. All the times she'd been useful until she wasn't. All the times she'd been told her place was conditional. And then she thought about Eirik. About mornings in the garden. About his small, tentative smiles. About the way he'd learned to sleep peacefully. About his drawing of 3 figures standing together. About the word safe, spoken with certainty instead of fear. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm willing. I choose him. I choose to stay." Eirik's grip on her hand tightened. And when she looked down at him, he was crying. Silent tears streaming down his face. But he was smiling. Actually smiling. "Lia," he whispered. "Stay." "Always," she whispered back. "I'm not going anywhere." Margot nodded, satisfied. "Then let it be witnessed," she said formally. "Elia is recognized as Eirik's chosen guardian. Their bond is acknowledged and protected by this pack." She turned to Kale. "Alpha, do you accept this arrangement?" Kale stepped forward. And when he spoke, his voice carried through the chamber. "I accept it. And more than that, I honor it." He looked at Elia. "Elia has given this pack more than healing for one boy. She's shown us what it means to truly care for our most vulnerable. What it means to choose patience over force. Presence over control." He paused. "She has my gratitude. My respect. And my protection." The weight in those words made Elia's breath catch. This was more than an alpha's formal acceptance. This was a promise. The gathering ended with formal acknowledgements. Pack members coming forward to welcome Eirik officially. To nod at Elia with new respect. But when the room finally cleared, when it was just the 3 of them standing in the empty chamber, Kale turned to them. "There's one more thing," he said quietly. Elia looked at him, questioning. "The bond between you and Eirik, it's real. It's permanent. And the pack has recognized it." He took a breath. "But Elia, there's another bond forming. One I haven't acknowledged publicly yet." Her heart started racing. "Between us," he said simply. The words hung in the air. Eirik looked between them, his expression thoughtful. Then, quietly, he let go of Elia's hand. And he stepped back, giving them space. Choosing to give them this moment. Kale moved closer. "I've been waiting," he said softly. "Giving you time. Giving us time. Because I didn't want to rush. Didn't want to confuse what you are to Eirik with what you're becoming to me." He reached for her hand. "But I can't wait anymore without telling you the truth." Elia's breath caught. "What truth?" "That I see you." His voice was steady, certain. "Not as Eirik's guardian. Not as a pack member who happened to help when we needed it. I see you. The woman who chooses gentleness even when the world hasn't been gentle. Who stays when leaving would be easier. Who believes in healing even when it's slow and uncertain." He squeezed her hand. "I see you, Elia. And I'm asking, if you're willing, if you're ready." He paused. "I'd like to know you. Not as your alpha. But as someone who cares for you. Who wants to build something with you. Who wants to give you the permanence you've never been allowed to have." Elia stared at him. Her mind was racing. This was an alpha. This was the alpha. Powerful, respected, grieving a mate he'd loved completely. And he was standing here, vulnerable and open, asking her. "I'm not like Marin," she whispered. "No," Kale agreed gently. "You're not. You're you. And I'm not asking you to be anything else." "I don't know how to do this," she continued. "I don't know how to be chosen. How to believe I'm worth keeping." "Then learn." His voice was soft. "With me. With Eirik. With this pack. We'll teach you. Every day, For as long as it takes. He brought her hand to his chest, over his heart. You're worth it, Elia. You've always been worth it. And if you'll let me, I'll spend however long you need proving that to you. Elia looked at Eirik. The boy was watching them with bright, knowing eyes. And he nodded. Just once. Permission. Encouragement. Blessing. From the person who knew her best. She looked back at Kale. And she thought about all the times she'd been told she was temporary. All the times she'd learned to survive by being small. All the times she'd believed mattering was too dangerous to risk. And then she thought about Eirik's healing. About how he'd learned to trust by being given time and space and presence without expectation. About how she'd taught him that safety was real by staying. By choosing him, over and over, until he believed it. Maybe she deserved the same thing. Maybe she was allowed to be chosen. To be stayed for. To matter. Okay, she whispered. Kale's eyes widened. Okay. Yes. She squeezed his hand. I'm scared. And I don't know how to do this. And I'll probably need you to be patient with me while I learn that I'm allowed to stay. She took a shaky breath. But yes. I want to try. I want to build something with you. I want. Her voice broke. I want to belong. Really belong. Not temporarily. Not conditionally. Just belong. Kale pulled her close. Wrapped his arms around her. And held her while she cried. Not sad tears. Not scared tears. Relief tears. The tears of someone who'd spent so long running that standing still felt like a miracle. You belong, he murmured against her hair. You've always belonged. From the first moment you walked into this pack. You just needed time to see it. Eirik moved closer. And without hesitation, he wrapped his arms around both of them. A small body pressed against them. Completing the circle. Making them whole. And standing there in that empty council chamber, the three of them held each other. A boy who'd learned to trust. A woman who'd learned to stay. A man who'd learned to hope again. Not perfect. Not without scars. But healing. Together. 6 months later. The garden was thriving. Tomatoes heavy on vines. Herbs fragrant in the evening air. Flowers blooming in colors that painted the world soft and bright. Elia knelt in the dirt, checking the squash plants. Eirik worked beside her, his movements confident now, his hands sure. And Kale sat on the garden bench, watching them. Not with duty or concern. With love. Simple, certain, endless love. Elia looked up and caught him watching. She smiled. He smiled back. And Eirik, noticing the exchange, grinned. Happy, he announced. It was a new word in his vocabulary. One he was using more and more. Yes, Elia agreed. Happy. She stood, brushed dirt from her knees, and crossed to where Kale sat. He pulled her down beside him. She leaned against his shoulder. And Eirik came to sit at their feet, his back resting against their legs. Connected. Touching. Together. This is it, Kale said quietly. This is what I was waiting for. What? Elia asked. This. Peace. Family. The feeling that everything is exactly where it's supposed to be. He looked down at Eirik, who was drawing in the dirt with a stick. Then at Elia, whose face was soft and open in a way it never had been when she'd first arrived. Maren would have loved you, he said quietly. Both of you. She would have said this is exactly what the pack needed. What I needed. Elia took his hand. I wish I could have known her. You do know her. Kale squeezed her hand. Every time you choose patience. Every time you stay when it's hard. Every time you believe in healing even when it seems impossible. That's her wisdom. Her legacy. He paused. And now it's yours too. As the sun set over the pack grounds, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, the three of them sat in the garden. Not speaking. Not needing to. Just existing. In the warmth of belonging. In the certainty of permanence. In the knowledge that they were chosen. All of them. By each other. And that no matter what came next, challenges or changes or the inevitable difficulties of life, they would face it together. As a family. As a pack within the pack. As three people who'd learned the most important lesson. That healing happens in spaces where nothing is demanded. That love is shown, not declared. That safety is built one gentle moment at a time. And that sometimes, not always but sometimes, the broken things can be made whole. Not fixed. Not erased. But transformed. Into something new. Something beautiful. Something that whispers. You are safe. You are chosen. You are home. And in the garden, as darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, three figures sat together. Small. Medium. Tall. Just like the drawing. Just like the promise. Just like the beginning of forever. Safe. Chosen. Home. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click